this time? Yes. Okay, good. Good. All right. Welcome back. I am going to waste no time because I realized that there was something that I forgot as a part of the last stream. It applies to the big, beautiful bill that is worse than the rest of the stuff in an immediate sense. Or I don't know if you could really say worse, don't compare two bad bitches against each other, right? But you know, I've said that like it's over a lot, and I know that the value of that statement can kind of be cheapened, but understand that I meant it then and I mean it now. And Gotron, it isn't just slightly more power either. Here we'll go to Newsweek, and I have some meta commentary on the state of the media landscape, because Newsweek is the only news outlet that is reporting this. Yeah, see, if you look, like, even after several days of this being out there, the only other news outlets I see even talking about this are the Daily Beast and USA Today. And then that's it. It's those two and Newsweek. Now let me explain what I'm talking about, and hopefully it should raise some alarm bells why none of the media outlets have mentioned this. There was a, quote, hidden provision that was snuck into the bill. Newsweek title reads, hidden provision in Trump's big bill could disarm U.S. Supreme Court. A provision, quote, hidden in the sweeping budget bill that passed the U.S. House on Thursday seeks to limit the ability of courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court, from enforcing their orders. No court of the United States, this is the direct text of the bill, no court of the United States may use appropriated funds to enforce a contempt citation for failure to comply with an injunction or temporary restraining order if no security was given when the injunction or order was issued. The provision of the bill reads, the bill itself being over 1,000 pages long. This provision, quote, would make most existing injunctions in antitrust cases, police reform cases, school desegregation cases, and others unenforceable. Erwin Chemerinsky, the dean of University of California, Berkeley School of Law, told Newsweek, it serves no purpose but to weaken the power of the federal courts. Sounds like Supreme Court underestimated the power of lawyers. This isn't the power of lawyers. The Supreme Court are lawyers. The people that wrote this bill are psychopaths. And there can be an overlap between psychopaths and lawyers. But there's only a couple fucking people in Congress that have law degrees, and they're not practicing lawyers. They're politicians. Effectively, to go back to recap what this provision means, it is not technically illegal for courts to issue national injunctions or injunctions against the federal government, right? They are legally allowed to do that. However, they are not legally allowed to use any of the money they receive in their budget to enforce those injunctions. This effectively neuters the entire court system. This is, again, it's another part of unitary executive theory. The government is now completely unrestrained from Congress because of the concept of executive orders and the ways in which Congress has willingly sidelined itself. And then, of course, from the Supreme Court and from the court system, there's been the 1-2 punch of capturing the highest court in the land so that they will be very deferential, and then sort of using that basically to neuter the rest of the court's ability to act against them, both through arresting judges and now through literally making it impossible for those courts to take any sort of meaningful legal action against the government. It used to be the case, Supreme Court bad, Republican politicians worse. Unironically, yes. It used to be the case that if if there was a suit brought against the federal government, as is something that happens, right? In order to challenge a law, for example, this bill is on its way to potentially being passed into law. Somebody would have to initiate a lawsuit against the federal government in a federal district, a federal court district. And if they win that decision, then the Supreme Court might decide to take it up. And if they lose, the onus is on the plaintiff to appeal, right? So it's like, I object to law XYZ. I'm going to sue the government for it. It costs a lot of money, but let's say you can get the money, you go to court, right? And you win the case. Great. You've won the case. Now the court can enforce upon the government that this law is unconstitutional and it can't enforce that. Except now they're not allowed to do that. They're not allowed to use any of the money they get through federal budgets. We're talking about federal courts, so they get their money from the federal budget. The courts, when somebody wins a lawsuit against the federal government, is not allowed to enforce the victory in that lawsuit. The government can just ignore them, right? And the federal marshals, the enforcement mechanism that the courts have, the federal marshals are part of the executive branch of the government. They're captured. They're completely compromised. The federal marshals, the judges would not have the authority to call in the federal marshals because they can't use federal funds to enforce rulings. They would literally, the only way that the courts can do anything now is literally by deputizing random private citizens in the hopes that that does something. And we're talking about deputized private citizens against the entire infrastructure of the federal government. We don't have a federal court system anymore. The court is no longer capable of, never mind the fact that the Supreme Court already wasn't willing to act as a check on the power of the federal government. Like, that power is just gone now. This is, it's kind of like how in Nazi Germany, they passed something called the Enabling Act, which effectively enabled Hitler and his administration, the cabinet, to rule by decree without having to go through the channels of Parliament. Without Parliament having to pass laws, the government could just pass those laws directly without a parliamentary vote. This is a similar concept, except in this case, the government is seizing this kind of lawmaking power kind of quietly. There's no media hubbub about this. I promise you, back in the day in Nazi Germany, newspapers were writing about the Enabling Act. That potentially very glowingly. I don't know exactly what the news coverage looked like at the time, but people were writing about it. Nobody's even writing about this, which is really bad. So effectively, this bill actually makes it so that for the federal government specifically, laws do not matter. The federal government can break the law, and it will be illegal to enforce a decision that, like, yeah, that's illegal, you can't do that. If the courts decide that is illegal, you can't do that because it's against the law, it's illegal for them to enforce that, which allows the federal government to commit all the fucking crime and abuse of human rights that it wants to, with literally no hope that anybody could ever slow them down. Because like I said, it's, the Supreme Court already wasn't willing to, but now the federal courts at large aren't able to. Big China W's because America is stupid. That's true. We'll get to that in a minute as well. But yeah. Why it matters. Let's read the Newsweek section about why this matters. I imagine they're going to say something similar to what I said, but maybe their professional writers can make it sound a little bit more digestible. The provision would prohibit courts from enforcing contempt citations for violations of injunctions or temporary restraining orders, the main types of rulings that have been used to rein in President Trump's administration, unless the plaintiffs have paid a bond, something that rarely happens when somebody sues the government. Paying a bond is something that happens when you're the one being sued, usually. So yeah, very unusual circumstance that anything would work here. If enacted, it would be a stunning restriction on the power of federal courts. Chemerinsky wrote in an article for Just Security. The Supreme Court has long recognized the contempt power is integral to the authority of federal courts, he wrote. Without the ability to enforce judicial orders, they are rendered mere adversary opinions which parties are free to disregard. You know, so like a court ruling would basically be, it's our opinion that that's illegal. And then the government's like, okay, cool. Well, that's just an opinion and you can't enforce that. So we're going to do this anyway. Like, imagine they just start to, like, you know, the ICE crackdowns become more frequent. They start rounding up citizens. They start rounding up political dissidents. The courts cannot stop them. Because they can say, this is illegal, this is unconstitutional, but they can't, like, send the marshals in to stop the government from doing these things. Not anymore. And of course, this is all under the assumption that this bill passes through the Senate and is signed by the president into law. Which it might be, but right now it is in the Senate. Because it's a budget bill, it only requires a 51 vote threshold, or a 50+1 vote threshold to pass. Things are looking pretty grim for this. You know? Especially because, as per the rotating villain strategy, there always seems to be just enough Democrats to sell the entire country up the river, you know, sort of behind the party's back, supposedly, while Republicans do so openly and freely, you know? Remember Chuck Schumer with the other Democrats that voted to, like, give the government more budgeting power. You know, budgeting is something that specifically Congress has the authority to do, and the Democrats helped Republicans, a few Democrats helped Republicans to basically make Congress into nothing more than a rubber stamp. And now Congress is using what little power and authority it has left potentially to make the courts occupy the same space. You know? When I say America is over, I mean it. Again, it sounds like hyperbolic, but, like, I meant it the other times that I said it, and I mean it now. Because, you know, there are dictatorships that have been very oft maligned that are more functional in a governmental sense than America would be should this bill pass, and even than America is right now. Like, record levels of dysfunction are happening right now, will happen as a result of this, and like, the corruption, the despotism on display, the ways in which people's lives will get worse in America if functionally the executive branch becomes the only relevant branch of government will be biblical. Let's see. Chemerinsky wrote that federal courts rarely require a bond to be posted by those who are restraining unconstitutional federal, state, or local government actions, as those seeking such orders, quote, do not have the resources to post such a bond, and insisting on it would immunize unconstitutional government conduct from judicial review. Basically, adding a monetary penalty to people suing the government makes it easier for the government to get away with illegal shit. But now that's the only way that you can challenge, like, if this, again, assuming this bill passes, that's the only way you can actually challenge the government and have it do anything. Colorado Democratic Representative Joe Neguse said in an interview that the provision was added because the Trump administration is losing in virtually every court in the land. Yeah, that almost certainly is why they added this, because they want to keep doing their shit, they want to keep flooding the zone, but the courts are actually, like, as gummed up as the court system is, it has in some ways actually function to slow down the administration, which, you know, gets on the government's nerves and you know, sort of flies in the face of their ideological priorities. The courts being shut down means that they get to do Project 2025 that much faster and with that much less opposition institutionally. Separation of something? Yeah, separation of powers is what it's called. Checks and balances, it's also known as. The separation of powers is the fundamental idea that, like, the power of the state should be divided between different sections of the government, which basically don't really have the authority to tread into each other's territory and effectively, like, but they do have the authority to prevent the other ones from, like, stepping out of line. Being sarcastic. Yes, I know. But, you know, I feel like it's good to start dealing with some of this stuff in earnest, because think about, like, kids who grow up in this era of America. Because of the direction the Republican Party is taking the education system, it's legitimately possible that a lot of the things that they did to make the country more authoritarian will be written out of the social memory in the classroom. Kids might not learn about the country that America used to be. They might be taught that, oh, things were always this way, and this is the greatest, most free country on earth, where, you know, the government can protect your freedom unfettered, right? Or some sort of boilerplate propagandistic line like that. It's important for, I think, you know, crack all the sarcastic jokes in the world. They're certainly warranted, but I have my reasons for addressing all this stuff in earnest. Because, you know, information's a valuable thing, and this is certainly part of, like, an information warfare campaign as well. It's not a coincidence that news outlets aren't talking about this, and it was hidden at the very end of a 1,000-page bill. The Republican Party and the capital class, their donors, basically the far right bloc, wants as few people to know about this as possible. And I will bet you my bottom dollar, I'm not usually a betting man, but I'm prepared to bet this, that the New York Times, the Washington Post, fucking CBS, NBC, ABC, all received some version of a top-down directive to do a media blackout on this story, to catch and kill it, or to just not run it if they have it, or something like that. Which is why you're only going to see it in the Daily Beast, USA Today, and Newsweek. These are not, like, big, like, massive publications. They're not, you know, small nothing burger newspapers, but it's, you know, it's pretty damn close. They're reputable in some fashion or another, but they're very small compared to most well-known media outlets. You know, nothing from the Boston Globe, nothing from the LA Times, nothing from, like, you know, New York Magazine, nothing. Absolutely nothing. And of course the right-wing, the conventional right-wing news media, the New York Post, the Washington Times, the, you know, Fox News, of course they're not talking about it because they want it to pass. Like, more straightforwardly, that's in their ideological interest for the court system to be fucking destroyed. So of course they're not going to talk about it. There's no way for them to talk about it and make it sound good. So they just don't talk about it at all. You know? Like, I'm positive some version of that is happening. And because you know, this is a socialist live stream channel, you know, imagine the shock of your average viewer. Guy who talks about radical politics is radical. That's crazy. It is also possible that this can be attributed in part, in some part, to an ideological failing of liberalism. That the most horrifying authoritarianism the modern world has literally ever seen is right in front of us, and liberals just don't know how to respond to it. So they kind of freeze in the headlights. Or in some measure, I'm sure something like that is happening, but it is 100%, you know, also involves top-down directives, because there's just no way to make this sound good. It's the reason they're trying to sneak it into a bill. Yeah, it's the reason that they like snuck it into a budget bill, you know? I often wonder where all the good journalists went. They left. They all got fired. Do you guys remember at the, you know, the access journalism problem has been getting worse for some time You know, because of the the infrastructure that's developed around having access to the president, access to the White House, and that has sort of eroded the willingness of journalistic institutions to be critical of power in any meaningful sense. Not to mention that all these news outlets are owned privately and supported by a class of donors who are the power apparatus of this country. So of course it's going to be in their interest to sort of gradually screen out all the journalists that could be critical of them in their interests, right? That's one part of it. Another part of it is that, especially after the 2024 elections, we saw journalists being fired straight up by people like Jeff Bezos, receiving like orders all the way from the top. Don't be critical of Donald Trump. Be deferential to Donald Trump. News articles being edited after the fact to make Trump look good. This has been like a mounting series of problems for some time. There used to be competent journalists who cared about speaking truth to power in the news media. They're all gone. You know, you think of the few journalists that do good work, they're independent. They operate outside of that private like ownership media framework for the most part. Think of like Aaron Reed, Alejandra Carballo, Ken Klippenstein, Ryan Grimm, Taylor Lorenz. They're not with the major news outlets. They're all doing their own shit. Sure, Ryan Grimm, is more or less with The Intercept. He writes for The Intercept. There's Dropsite and whatever. There's Mehdi Hassan at Zeteo. But consider, they had to create these news outlets because they were kicked off of sites like MSNBC. Mehdi Hassan, one of the best journalists that's currently out there, was a voice of reason, an increasingly based voice of reason at MSNBC, and they fired him for it. So he had to go and create his own journal, effectively, where he still speaks truth to power. There's increasingly few of them left. Let's continue with this Newsweek article. Dozens of lawsuits have been filed since Trump returned to office, challenging his executive orders and actions taken by the administration. Judges have partially or fully blocked the president in at least 82 cases. I'm hitting a bunch of walls, might be. According to a tally by the Associated Press. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention AP is another big news outlet that just straight up isn't talking about this. Same with Reuters. It's just every time you think of a news outlet, that's another institutional voice that's completely silent and complicit in this. Let's see. 82 times defeated in federal court. You know, El Bozo, so they just made it illegal for them to lose in federal court. Very nice. The administration has been pushing back against court rulings it doesn't like, with the president lashing out at judges who rule against him and seeking an end to nationwide injunctions. Yeah, I mean, to this end, they had already started arresting judges. Not necessarily directly for ruling against the administration, but for like clearly for that as the real reason, but with other things as ancillary justifications. In this instance, this law makes it so they don't need to do that. Like the courts are just no longer of concern to them. Dang. Didn't make it up top. That's unfortunate. The Supreme Court earlier in May barred the administration from quickly resuming deportations under the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Meanwhile, U.S. District Judge Paul Azinis has expressed frustration that the administration has yet to provide information that adequately explained how it was complying with her order, upheld by the Supreme Court, to facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He's still in El Salvador. He's still rotting in CCOT. The most innocent man in America is still rotting in a gulag because the administration just didn't feel like bringing him back. And because they sent him there in the first place, because they hate you. And last month, Another federal judge said he found probable cause to hold the administration in criminal contempt after ignoring his order to turn around planes carrying deportees to El Salvador. District James Judge Boasberg said he would initiate hearings and may refer the matter for prosecution if the administration does not act to remedy the violation. The administration has also removed immigrants against court orders in other cases. The provision in this House bill, quote, would make the court orders in these cases completely unenforceable, according to Chemerinsky. Indeed, this bill is stunning in its scope. It would apply to all temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions, and even permanent injunctions ever issued. This applies retroactively, guys. The entire concept of judicial review is gone if this passes. Because you could pick any court ruling from history, in the entire history of American law, the government no longer has to listen to them because they are unenforceable. Do you know how much civil rights law is grounded in court cases? Basically, the entire foundation of gay rights in this country, queer rights, is grounded in case law, not in congressional law. Case law. Gay marriage, that was ratified via court decision. That was made constitutionally protected by court decision. The Voting Rights and Civil Rights Act are upheld through various court decisions. The laws themselves have been chipped away at over time. Effectively, this even applies to congressional laws, because the way you ensure that the federal government complies with the laws that are on the books is by making sure the courts have a watchful eye on them at all times. The government has had to be sued several times for not adequately upholding the principles of the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act of 1964 and 1965, respectively. Those are the laws that make racial segregation illegal. Segregation is now functionally legal again. You understand what this means. The government can do whatever it wants. Even something like slavery isn't off the table here. And of course it never was, because the 13th Amendment allows for slavery to be used in cases of prison labor. But there are so many advancements, meaningful advancements, even if not whole, even if halfway advancements, they was still something that are effectively completely rolled back by a little bit of text they hid in a 1,000-page budget bill. And that's what I mean when I say that America is kind of like Jover. It's over. It was a good run in some ways. In others, it really wasn't a good run. But, we're no longer a nation of sort of liberal institutional law as a concept. The concept of law has sort of been written out. Again, assuming that this passes. I have no reason to believe that it won't. Unfortunately. This will basically give way to unchecked state power being used against any and everybody they feel like at any time. Like I said, the ways in which this will make life worse and more dystopian for basically every conceivable type of person if you are not a billionaire is biblical. And I'm going to get to the end of this article, and I want to introduce some sort of a sort of caveat so that nobody in my chat decides it's a good idea to whack themselves, because it's still not. This is why we get upset about all this, is because fundamentally we view life as worth living, and we're upset that this will make life harder, but that doesn't mean we think life is just not worth it anymore. You know? We get upset because we care enough to get upset, right? So we should keep being upset. Take that, thank you. A mushroom, you say? Ow. They're gonna blame us for not warning them? Oh yeah, I fully expect, to the extent that, normie libs exist after all is said and done, once this sort of second Bronze Age collapse passes us by, I fully expect normie liberals to both say, how could this happen? And also blame the left when we were the ones, like, screaming our fucking heads off about it for years. You know? Never let the liberals forget how complacent they were in all this. Because that's the only way that you prevent shit like this from happening again, is you, like, you be really fucking mean to people who are, like, indifferent to shit like this happening. You have to maintain a sort of political vigor and desire for life and change in the body politic in whatever way is possible. And apathy is how we got to this point. Apathy is not how we're gonna get out. The sort of idle I told you so-ing isn't gonna work. We need to be meaner in telling the liberals we fucking told you and you didn't believe us. We need to drive it into their thick skulls. Basically. What people are saying. Chemerinsky also wrote, without the contempt power, judicial orders are meaningless and can be ignored. This guy's a judge, by the way. There is no way to understand this except as a way to keep the Trump administration from being restrained when it violates the Constitution or otherwise breaks the law. The House and Senate should reject this effort to limit judicial power. Too late, the House already passed it. The House has already given the thumbs up. There were a couple of... Actually, I don't want to spread misinfo. I may be mistaken. I don't know if there were Democrats that voted for this. I know that Jerry Connolly dying actually made a difference because it passed by 1 vote. It passed 215 to 214. I don't know if there were any Democrats that sort of that sided with Republicans on this, because if there is so much as a single Democrat that voted for this bill, and even in the event that there wasn't a Democrat that voted for this bill, I consider the Democratic Party as complicit in this. They are complicit in the decline that got us to this point. They are complicit in the attitude of fucking disdain and hatred for their own political base of support that led to them keeping geriatric skeletons like Jerry Connolly in office because it was his turn or something like that, resulting in a 1-vote gap that allowed this bill to be passed. There are so many things that I will forever blame the Democratic Party for in this instance. And of course, the Republicans I am treating here as a raging fire that consumes anything alive in its path. They are a force of nature that is incapable of doing good. Meanwhile, the Democrats are the ineffectual Roman firefighters who are running an extortion racket to maybe put out the fire if they feel like it. And they never do. The person least likely to get out of this fine is the liberals, because everybody needs them. Yeah. I think I'm gonna get first here. I got first. So on second thought, it doesn't even matter whether Democrats voted for this or not, because they're complicit either way. Everyone hates them. Oh, yeah. Yeah, fully this is going to contribute to the amount of hate that the Democratic Party gets, and they deserve that hate. A spokesperson for the House Ways and Means Committee told CNN that the goal is to stop frivolous lawsuits. This is a Republican. There's this Representative Neguse from Colorado, again, saying, like, they're doing this because they're losing in court, so they want to stop losing in court. They'll just eliminate the courts. Robert Reich, former labor secretary and a professor of public policy at the University of California, Berkeley, and also an economist. Robert Reich, very active on writing, his Substack. He's doing what he can. Posted on Substack that the hidden provision makes Trump king. He wrote, "No Congress and no court could stop him. Even if a future Congress were to try to stop him, it could not do so without the power of the courts to enforce their hearings, investigations, subpoenas, and laws. What can you do? To begin with, call your members of Congress and tell them not to pass this bill. And of course, that is something that you can do, and you should do that. Yeah, stop useless lawsuits, like, upholding human rights. Oh. Okay. And I feel like well, more than I feel like. I know for a fact this law, or soon to be law, potentially, was not Trump's brainchild. You know, Trump likes to be a big boy that makes deals and stuff like that. But Trump isn't smart enough to come up with something this devious that would fucking cut the courts out of the equation entirely. Are you in the Progressive Victory Discord? Yes, I am. This has to be the brainchild of somebody else in the administration. Like, the administration is full of Nazis. Like, Trump is arguably the least evil person in his own government. Just because he's too dumb and, like, too much of just a senile old man to really give that much of an active shit about making everybody's life worse, you know? He even let slip that the new tariffs that are coming up weren't exactly his idea, you know, that, like, he was suggested them from somebody else. And then we have the Newsweek fairness-o-meter, or fairness meter, and of course, all of the votes lead to the, because, like, the most insane, terminally online Nazis all flock to, vote on how good or bad the news coverage is on a fucking news outlet, like, comment section. The needle is always on unfair left-leaning. And you know what? To that end, I give credit to Newsweek. Here I am saying the praises of a news media outlet, something I thought I would never do. But yeah, Newsweek has actually been not the worst news coverage, like, not by a long shot. In fact, you know, I consider it like a gold star on their part, that it's like, this is one of the only news outlets talking about the massive implication that this bill has. And yeah, reality is biased to the left. Eat shit, conservatives. You know? But now to that caveat. I sort of talked about this earlier. Is America over? Yes. Is life still worth it? Also yes. We are potentially, using my, you know, archaeology brain, I can deduce expertly, there are conditions at work today that are somewhat reminiscent, I would say, of broad patterns that were happening to bring about what we know as the Bronze Age collapse. The Bronze Age collapse was basically a multinational, like, interstate collapse of the body politic in a way that sort of erased documentation for a while. You know, like, we call it the Bronze Age collapse because it was truly a comprehensive sort of collapse, you know? But people lived during that time period. That's why we know anything about it. People lived through the Bronze Age collapse as it was happening. There were people there to, you know, recount what happened afterwards. Sure, like, every major empire and state basically crumbled to dust. But in the aftermath of the Bronze Age collapse, there was still a society to worry about. And there was still life to live. And I feel like the same thing is going to be happening here. It might not be a multinational collapse. We might see a global economic collapse because, you know, the United States has been extremely volatile. And, you know, as we all know, volatility is very good for the stability of global economics, especially when it's coming from the largest economic bloc in the world. You know, things are going to get worse, but we're gonna, you know, we're gonna survive through it anyway, because that's kind of how life works, isn't it? Trying to make America look like it's stuck in early 2008. You know, I think there's more truth to that than maybe you realize. We never recovered from 2008. The crisis never stopped. The recovery, because the recovery was directed at like the bankers, the fucking investment bankers, and all the people who created the crisis to begin with, nothing got fixed. Like, the housing crisis started, and and it never fucking ended. You know? We were told that it ended. We were told that the 2008 to 2009 financial crisis was an event or series of events that was, for the most part, contained to 2008 and 2009. But no, it never stopped. All of the economic crisis sort of elements, all of the individual economic factors and material factors that you could label as the component part of a larger crisis that were present in 2008 are still present today. None of them have been addressed. Only real life war that was mentioned in Marvel was in the first Iron Man? Yeah. It's the only time Marvel was probably worth a damn. Except for Captain America the Winter Soldier. That one was pretty good too. You know? So basically what I'm saying is, Owarida. We're entering the fucking It's So Jover chapter, right? But like I said in the other part of this segment, God, this is going to be a whole ass segment unto itself. I've been talking for a long time. Look, to cap this off, this is the Big Beautiful Bill chapter of history. This is end stage capitalism. Capitalism is cannibalizing itself. But the big booty bitches chapter of history is going to come eventually. Craigasm. Both in that we will be in the company of the big booty bitches, and we will be the big booty bitches, right? Better things are in fact possible, even in as bleak of an environment as today. That's why things are getting so bad so quickly all the time. That's why, you know, the administration is rushing to do shit like this, because they know that, like, better things are possible. They just ideologically oppose things being possible, like, good things, categorically. Yeah, and you know, it's like, I would actually consider this potentially even beyond late-stage capitalism. You know, late-stage capitalism implies a sort of functionality reminiscent of its of its preceding stage, high-stage capitalism. You know, like, it's still, you know, works more or less. It's just the contradictions are becoming more apparent. Now, the economy at a broad scale, capitalism is becoming so fundamentally dysfunctional. I would consider this a new stage of capitalism, the end stage, where it's just all, like, everything is just constantly falling apart because capitalism constantly needs fuel for its fire. So it's starting to light itself ablaze because it has run out of fuel from elsewhere. You know? So, again, folks who are watching this on YouTube, comment I'm ready if you're ready for the Big Booty Bitches chapter of history, aka socialism, right? Where it will be everybody's God-given right to be a big booty bitch if they so choose, and to be whatever kind of big booty bitch they so choose. And where rents are like 5 cents or something. Future me, cut the segment. Ow! Fucking Jesus. Mushrooms? Mushrooms. The track is really good. We're at the beginning of whatever this is after. Wait, what? I feel like autocorrect kind of murdered that message. Anyway, on a related note. Oh yeah, the disaster that doesn't have a name yet. Yeah, like there's gonna be a fucking name for the like for the fucking 40 to 50 year period that started with Ronald Reagan and ended with like whatever the fuck this is. Or like potentially even the 60 to 70 years that this is going to end up being. Like that period of time is going to have a name for how bad it is. I want to colonize the stars. Don't do that. Colonizing the stars simply represents an extension of capitalism. Remember, capitalism actually started as a mercantile colonial ideology. It's basically just that's kind of just like the desire to find more fuel for a dying engine, effectively, a dying economic engine, more or less. You know, it's not really feasible with what we have now. And if we do develop technology that's capable of that, you better believe that like nothing fundamental will have been addressed in developing such technology. It would just recreate capitalism, but now on other planets, where Earth would potentially come to resemble an imperial core, much the way that America or Britain did in their colonial heyday. But then all of the outgroup territories, you know, the colonized planets, would look like wretched backwater territories that were being ruthlessly exploited for profit, you know? It would just be the same shit again. Hope in the future they don't call you I feel like hopefully I feel like liberalism will be relegated to the chapters of history books in the future, right? Like I said, it's, you know, it's a dying ideology. So I feel like people are going to look upon liberalism now you know, from right now, the way that people nowadays look upon feudalism and the ideology that feudalism represents. You know? That guy almost bumped me off. Shit. Again, this cough is very persistent. But yeah, anyways, I was going to talk about the Chinese century, because, bro the boss, you sent that thing in chat. That actually got me kind of interested in, you know, what all was going on there. Oh, I got him. Cool. I didn't think my red shell would get him, but, you know. Pleasant surprises, I guess. Jesus fucking Christ. It's been a week and a half since I was sick, and this damn cough won't go away still. What's your opinion on Digital Circus? I don't know what that means. Taking over the WHO is crazy. Well, they're not taking over the WHO, is the thing. That's not what that is. That might be how Reuters framed it. But Reuters is American media, and it thus basically has a legal obligation to be extremely fucking racist towards, like, China. YouTube indie animation. Oh. I don't know, because I've never watched it. And so I don't really have an opinion on it. If it's good, then great. I'm happy for you. Then if it's bad, then I'm sorry that happened, I guess. Puzzle piece captcha. China to give $500 million to WHO in next 5 years, official says. This is good. This is cool and good, actually. It's good when countries contribute lots of money to international institutions that are tasked with, like, public service duties, you know? He said duty. Everybody get him? Geneva. China will give an additional $500 million to the World Health Organization over 5 years, an official told the World Health Assembly on Tuesday, as the UN agency seeks extra funding to offset the expected loss of its top donor, the United States. Yep, there you go. So as a result of the United States pulling out of the international community, there's a very large funding void that needs to be filled, and it seems China is saying, we will fill that void, right? We're going to give money, you know, and of course, like, they're doing it because it is, like, geopolitically advantageous to them on one front, but also, like, they're a rational actor for the most part, and they recognize, like, yeah, having a public health institution is probably a good thing for us and for, like, everybody else as well. So we're gonna give the WHO some money in all of the ways that China also acts very authoritarian, because, you know, big country, big state, etc. China takes science as a set of institutions, as a set of principles and, like, research guidelines way more seriously than the United States ever has. You know, they give a lot more attention to what social scientists say, what ecologists say, you know, environmental scientists, and to what medical researchers say. You know, like, China was famously and infamously very, very strict with their COVID lockdowns, which resulted in some you know, in a lot of you know, authoritarian crackdowns on protests and stuff like that, you know, under the pretext of medical safety and such. But it also resulted in China being very successful in limiting the amount of damage that COVID was able to really do to them in a sort of lives lost scale, you know? They also, I know this from my experience in college, they do care a lot about, you know, like, their history, their archaeology departments at the universities and stuff like that. They you know, they're no slouch when it comes to the social sciences and the, you know, the material sciences as well, supporting that, you know? So, great. Marginal upgrade to America. Although, on another level, obviously it is concerning that China is also a neoliberal state, albeit one that is more willing to put a leash on the capital class. A pretty short leash compared to other countries. You know, so given that the underlying dynamic still remains more or less unchanged, it is entirely possible that, you know, if this turns out to be the Chinese century, we basically prolong the inevitable collapse of liberalism for another 2 or 3 generations before things come to a truly unavoidable head at a global scale, rather than just in the United States, you know? Sad that some people fall for the China is communist thing. Yeah, no, China is not a communist country. But one thing I will say is that they are very influenced by communist thinkers. They were very influenced by Marx. They were very influenced by Mao and Deng, even though he's just a neolib, right? I guess you could say this for all states, but no, there's no such thing as a communist state, because, you know, you check the dictionary, you check the definition of communism, it says right there, stateless, classless, and moneyless society. So, you know, can't really do that. And of course, there's still, like, private property ownership, etc., etc. Basically, China is to the United States as Bill Clinton was to Ronald Reagan. They're just much better at managing capitalism than we are. You know? Like I said, they have actually been influenced by a lot of academics and critics of capitalism. They understand that, like, if we're still going to have this system, we basically need a really short leash that can easily be tugged upon for, you know, the owning class. But ultimately, they still have the owning class and the working class. China makes more millionaires than the United States, and that's probably because there's just more people in China than the United States. Most likely. Although beyond that, I'm not really sure what the explanation would be there. I think God, the world inequality reports and, like, statistics that we frequently rely on to measure inequality can be varying degrees of reliable. But I think the last time I remember seeing some kind of indication of what inequality looked like in the United States, it was like we had just passed China. So like China is in some ways like more economically egalitarian than the United States, which again is not a high bar to clear. The bar is in hell. The United States literally kills their homeless population. China, you know, hides them. Sure, both countries are shit ass on like healthcare and housing policy and stuff. It's just like China manages to play second fiddle to how bad neoliberalism is in America, effectively, is what we're talking about here, you know? In many ways, in fact, because of how much of a manufacturing power China is right now, it's kind of reminiscent of a 20th century United States, an ascendant United States, you know, back when America was a manufacturing power. Please don't tell me you're one of those people that says, but America is worse. Buddy, have you been reading the news? America is worse now. It didn't used to be, but now it kind of is. That's not what I meant. No, I'm not. I'm not like making excuses. If that's what you meant, no, I'm not like. I'm not a statist. Thank you. This is an anarchist channel. I will say positive things about China sometimes in the context of comparing it to the United States, because the United States has been constantly getting worse, and China has simply been like doing the neoliberal stagnation bit, but like slower. You know? Both countries suck. Remember, like, remember back to like a couple minutes ago what I said. There's a very real possibility that I'm very not enthused about, like in the slightest, that if/when China becomes like the global hegemon, we have the same neoliberal crisis because China's still a neoliberal country. We just rewind the clock a few decades, right? Which means this shit will happen all over again, just in China. And then also to the rest of the world, because that's how being a global hegemon works, right? Look, when I say I'm a socialist, I mean I'm a socialist. Public ownership of the means of production, democratic ownership of the means of production, and the abolition of things like money and interest and the state. Imagine the clock thing just keeps happening with different countries. That's the neat part. Eventually, they're going to run out of countries that they can do that with. You know, there won't be any more countries that are able to, like, make the neoliberal engine churn for any longer. It is truly, like, a world of finite resources that cannot be infinitely exploited. You know? You know, this is kind of what people get at when we say that, like, this is the beginning of the end, or something like that. I think this is one of those situations where it's applicable to say that this is the beginning of the end. If things go relatively well, it's possible that this crisis only lasts for a decade or two. But if things do not go especially well, it's possible that the crisis is amplified by the buck being basically passed on a global scale from country to country, you know, from global hegemon to global hegemon, all running through neoliberalism until they're, like, sucking on fumes, basically. And there's, like, truly nothing left. Liberals act like if that clock reaches zero, everyone dies. Yeah, because to them, socialism is like everybody dying, because when you are... when people have freedom, when they have free healthcare, housing, and, you know, have a say over their own lives, and, like, private property isn't a thing, to them, that's like everybody dies, because, I don't know, it means, like, you can't, like, invest money in the stock market or something. Again, I'm a communist. I want money to be abolished, you know? Like, you know, with especially because of the way that the circulation of money through debt has just allowed this giant economic bubble on top of everything to just kind of make everybody's life worse and crush everybody else. You know? Like, the fake economy is fake, but it's real enough to make all of our lives worse. The anarchist gives the main character nightmares. Classic. This is characteristic of how liberals view anarchists. Is there any more to this article? Yes, there is. Sorry, I stopped short. China's vice premier of the State Council, Liu Guozhong, made the announcement in a speech in Geneva. This is about the $500 million over 5 years. Again, and that's still not very much, because it's the World Health Organization. I guess maybe they don't need that much. The world is now facing the impacts of unilateralism and power politics, bringing major challenges to global health security. Multilateralism is a sure path to addressing difficulties. I don't really think that means anything particularly, except for that, like, oh yeah, we should all donate to the WHO. Smile. Smiley face. The WHO has already revised down its 2026 to 27 budget by 21% to $4.2 billion due to its financial difficulties caused mainly by the Trump administration's decision. The new budget, set to be decided by the Assembly on Tuesday, will increase countries' mandatory fees by 20% over the next 2 years and will make China the new top state donor. It was not immediately clear if the $500 million donation from China already included that fee increase. Interesting. Okay. So, pretty short article from Reuters. Last episode. Okay. Uh-oh. Looks like I'm going to need to ban somebody. I don't know if 1v3 is here. Oh well, it's fine. I can just ban them once I get the opportunity of this race. In the meantime, point and laugh at the fucking bot account that's, like, telling me to buy viewers or some shit. Not like they have feelings, right? Not gonna lie, it pissed me off when bring up Stalin and Mao when I say I'm a social democrat. When they say this, state ran as a dictatorship, not as a democracy. Democracy is the only way leftist government can survive. Well, yeah, I mean, the thing that people bring up Stalin and Mao mostly about, I think, with social democrats is something that, like, on rare instances they might be right to, is that Stalin disingenuously argued that that social democracy is the moderate wing of fascism, which is actually true. I've read academic, like, I've read some theorists from the late 19th century. The social democrats, like, fascism came from social democracy, because, like, the main issue that many socialists, including myself, took with social democracy was that, and is that, it is still an ideology contingent on a capitalistic bedrock, you know, where it's basically, it's almost like a better version of what China is doing, keeping a very, very tight leash on the capital class while permitting said class to exist. Here, I'll just ban this person. You know? Hitler even joked about having been a social democrat before he created the Nazi Party. You know? So there's something there, right? But, like, fundamentally, social democracy, it was tried, and it had many great successes. The NLRA, which established the NLRB, the Public Works Administration, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all of these things that we rely on that are bedrocks of American civil society, all the welfare programs in Europe, all of their, you know, single-payer healthcare systems and stuff like that. All of those are successes of social democracy, but because they didn't fundamentally alter the relationship between labor and capital, they still allowed for private ownership. They left themselves susceptible to being eroded over time. Those gains were rolled back because they didn't basically, like, reform their way into socialism. They stopped. You know? But yes, obviously, democracy is like the most stable form of society, and any socialist system would necessarily be democratic. That's kind of what makes it socialism, is that you are extending the bounds to which democracy applies. You know, I have a video on this. I talk about what influences my socialist politics very briefly. You know, but in a country like the USSR or in China, that, you know, that's not socialism. Number one, there's no worker ownership of economic production. But then number two, the hierarchy of the state is still present, which means you still have a ruling class and a class that is ruled, or a class that functionally owns all of the things and material forces of society and gets to command them, and a class that is to be commanded and ruled over. And that is like living on the margins, despite composing the vast majority of society. You know? Like, the term state capitalism doesn't exist for nothing. They also chose the candidates? Yes, that's right. In fact, that's kind of how they maintained the veneer of, like, being a socialist state or whatever. They're like, oh, haha, see, we have a democratic process, but, like, the party council or whatever chose all the candidates and, like, pre-selected for who was even allowed to run, or, you know, all that stuff. Literally in the last season of Legend of Korra, it's like Hitler was just misguided. Yeah, true. It's a one-party system over there? Yeah. So that's one joke, where it said one of the Avengers stop Russia from invading Ukraine. True. If only. Yeah, one-party systems fucking suck. That's why America and China both suck. In part, at least. That's one reason why they both suck. Again, like... They wanted all the Avengers to stop Russia from invading Ukraine. Yeah, true. We'll never get that, though. That'd be too based. Yeah. Yeah, the Luxemburgist critique, which I can really see where she was coming from because of what happened to the social democratic movement in Europe, is basically that there were some moderate elements of the socialist movement, right? That advocated for reforming into socialism, which on some level I still believe is a fundamentally good idea, because you have to have a multifaceted approach if you have such a big political project. But they discounted revolution as a possibility. They strictly wanted to reform, which was already a major concession that was made. And Luxemburg spends plenty of time lambasting the reformists. But those reformists turned into non-socialist social democrats. People like Edward Bernstein, you know, and Karl Kautsky, I believe, was another one. These were the early social democrats of Europe that diverged from socialism and said that it's okay for us to keep the market-based private ownership model of production so long as the state is an agent of the working class rather than the owning class. They started to basically abandon the revolutionary aspect of upending the class relationship and molding society into something stateless, classless, and moneyless. They abandoned that mission, right? Then the Social Democrats further leaned into these concessions. They started saying, well, actually, this whole class warfare thing is extremely detrimental to society. Again, an observation that many socialists have made, and is the bedrock for a lot of socialist thought, that the class conflict has to be resolved. The Social Democrats started arguing that instead of obliterating the class relationship by creating a classless society, why not simply reconcile the interests of the two classes, right? The owning class and the working class, the capitalists and the laborers. And you could do so under the auspice of the state. The state could be used as a tool to bridge the gap between the interests of the working class and the interests of the owning class. And that is where fascism's origins lie in a modern sense. The class reconciliation, the class collaborationism, as it was called, is the bedrock of fascist ideology in Nazi Germany, in Italy, and in America today. That the state is the end unto which society exists, and the sole function of the state is basically to keep the classes in line, in their proper places, which means cementing the class hierarchy with the owning class on top and the working class on the bottom, where they currently exist. That is how a series of academics and politicians broke from socialism and slowly conceded their way, very neoliberally so. They literally made end of history arguments while doing this, saying that we've done all the history, the normal class dynamics don't apply anymore because we'll just be nice now, smiley face. They did that cycle, the exact cycle we're witnessing the Democratic Party do now, until they had ideologically reached fascism. In fact, I mentioned that Hitler joked about being a social democrat when somebody at like a Nazi party meeting was accused of being a social democrat and spying for the opposition. He said, "Oh, we've all been social democrats at one time or another." And in fact, Hitler's own description of the National Socialist platform, the Nazi platform, was, in his words, not mine, a form of national social democracy. When you stop focusing on the class elements, with the underlying issues that create like a steadily worsening and consolidating society, and when you shift your focus towards the state and the state basically as not just a means to an end, such that the state may no longer exist someday, but as the end unto itself, you very, very quickly bridge from left-leaning social democracy into fascism. It's the far-right pipeline. It was, in fact, the far-right pipeline of its day, because the nationalism of the 19th and 20th centuries was sort of the soup du jour that led to conversations in politics being centered around the state. National self-determination, freedom of nations, which effectively meant the freedom for the state, which meant freedom for the owning class. You know? I meant socialist democracy. That's okay. That's okay. Look, it's all good. Didn't know there was a difference between social democracy and socialist democracy. You know, that's the crazy thing. Originally, there wasn't. Luxemburg actually talks about the socialist future. She uses the terms socialism, communism, and social-democracy interchangeably. Those three terms were interchangeable at the time because the divide was only just beginning to show, right? Many of the socialists envisioned socialism as a project of social democracy, as in the extension of democracy more into social life to fix the problems of alienation that people were facing in the workplace, right? But yeah, nowadays, there is a substantial difference where a lot of social democrats, people that call themselves social democrats, can be anywhere from kind of like lefties who haven't quite found their footing to centrists that hate socialism but vaguely like the idea of taxing the rich more. I wish that liberal was a slur and I can use it. I'm going to give you some great news. Anything is a slur if you're brave enough. If you want to use the word liberal as a slur, you can use it as a slur. I know I do. But yeah, bro, the boss. It's a really interesting, like, storied ideological journey that's you know, that came around as a product of like capitalism going from one stage to the next, and all this like technological advancement and changes in the processes of production and whatever that were happening at the tail end of the, or not even the tail end, throughout the 19th century. You know? Luxemburg even predicts by name National Socialism, which is fucking crazy. She was right, like, she wrote this shit in 1896. I think the essay she wrote about this in you know, the growing divide between the Social Democrats and the Socialists, and their over-reliance on nationalism and the state as the artifice through which all politics happens, and stuff like that. She literally predicts that these increasingly nationalist Social Democrats will invent a new ideology that is still, like, in some way grounded in the old socialist ideas immediately post-liberal revolutions, but they will call it National Socialism because it is socialism, but solely applied to the state. The state gets to own things. The people do not. You know? I had to, like, double and triple check that what year the essay was written in, and it was written in 1896. Sure enough, 1920 something, you get the National Socialist German Workers' Party, courtesy of, like, Adolf Hitler and some other weirdos. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Sometimes I hate words. Yeah, it's true. When I didn't have my footing, it was basically an anarchist without knowing the word. That's cool. Yeah, words are complicated. Also, it is worth noting, if you hear some of the stuff that the average European social democrat has to say, it is really, really easy to see how social democracy turns into fascism and national socialism. Like, you know, those social democrats will say stuff about protecting the welfare state and whatever, but then just fucking ask them their opinion about immigration and, like, I don't know, like Serbians or something. Now, about Serbians specifically, they might be cooking, but, like, ask them their opinion of Turkish people, you're gonna hear some extremely racist shit, you know? And that's because that's your brain on the politics of nationalism and not the politics of class. And the, you know, the politics of, like, systemic root causes of issues. Ah! I didn't expect that to have that little off-road, oddly enough. No! I'm taking a beating today in this worldwide session. There we go. This is a better shortcut. We'll go for this box. Banana. I think I'm happy with a banana for now. In third place. Ooh. Shocked right before the boxes. Bucket. Throw that blue shell, baby. Yes! Throw the red shell. Be evil. No! Okay. Fair enough. I told him to do it, Your Honor. Alright. I'm just gonna start gunning it with this golden mushroom. Yeah, I think that was a good decision. No, never mind! Even though this sounds really silly, imagine January 6th in the Marvel Universe. I feel like they wouldn't know how to, You know what? I'm imagining it now, and I actually can't, because I'm trying to imagine stuff that happens based on, like, like how the real world works, more or less. I actually can't imagine how they would try to rewrite it if it were a Marvel movie, right? Because Marvel movies are, like, fantastical. And to the extent that they incorporate politics at all, they either have to hide it from the fucking executives, so they get to do something actually pretty cool, or they show it to the executives and they have to make it so altered from reality that it becomes incoherent. you know? And not just the kind of incoherent that fascism already is in reality. I mean, like, it doesn't even work in like a, like, it doesn't even make sense if you understand the psychoses of that lead people to do things. Like, I genuinely feel like because of how lib-coded the Marvel universe is, I feel like it wouldn't be possible for January 6th to happen because, you know, you imagine the Marvel universe as sort of a conduit for liberal ideology. Liberals literally were not capable of understanding why January 6th happened or what to do about it. So I feel like that would be reflected in the Marvel universe. But yes, as you point out, if it was the X-Men, they would be on their shit. They would be like, oh yeah, it was like all anti-mutant people who were like also rabid right-wingers for everything else. And like, basically it would just be January 6th, like the regular version. But there was also, instead of them just hating like trans people, they would have also had some like anti-mutant flags, you know? Although there still might be a very, very large deficiency in how like the in-universe government responds to it, or even how the X-Men writers respond to such an event happening. Because remember, this is still like the world where we're talking about like Charles Xavier and his school of mutants and shit, right? Recently on X-Men 97, they were like to their friends who are human, the like Republicans, you mean me or whatever. I'm not sure if I take the meaning. Oh yeah, people who didn't like aren't who are watching it realizing like they are the fucking the humans that hate mutants and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's especially with, I think a little while ago, there was like a state representative, of a Republican state rep, that called trans people mutants and demons. I feel like the parallels between trans people and X-Men, mutants in the X-Men world are very, like, noticeable and apt, you know? And I win. Nice. Like, oh, I'm the bad guy. And then they probably get mad at the series because nobody's capable of critical thinking anymore or whatever. Yeah. Yeah, dude, you kidding me? I wish I was fucking, well, I was gonna say I wish I was Rogue, but really I wish I could just exist in the same world as Rogue because holy shit, she is hot. In, like, every conceivable way, you know? Just absolutely magnetic. So many media called it woke. Yeah, I mean, that tracks. Seriously, like, they say Magneto has the power of magnetism, but frankly, I can't fucking stay away from Rogue. X-Men movies couldn't be made today, even if Disney tried. It would be stupid. Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. Disney would fucking neuter it. In the comic, they literally had an AIDS allegory. Yeah. I think I even remember that. Maybe, vaguely. I don't remember what exactly the story was about. But I knew it was like an allegory for the AIDS epidemic, and then obviously it's because like X-Men and mutants were meant to be the queer community. And to a point in X-Men's favor, by the way, point in favor of X-Men and all the people who are X-Men appreciators, it is really remarkable, I think, how seamlessly the sort of the discourse evolved to include trans people more. Like everybody just sort of automatically understood that, oh yeah, You know, X-Men being an allegory for the queer community also means it's an allegory for the trans community because they are also part of the queer community and stuff like that, you know? I think that's cool. It's probably from the show that's adapted like the comics, maybe. Yeah, they different mutants have different problems or air quote problems or conditions or whatever, or mutant abilities or whatever, but they all recognize that there's something about them that makes them like maybe a little bit different from the not mutant like human population, and that leads to them living on the margins, you know? Like, even if in in the mutants case, it's even interesting because it's like a steel man argument. It's like it's a steel man argument for solidarity, right? Even though a lot of the X-Men are physically just about as different as you could possibly imagine, like on a physiological level, they are vastly different from one another and from like not mutant humans and stuff like that. But there's a commonality of experience. They recognize those physical differences are superficial at best when we're talking about living in a broader society that has a body politic, right? They all of them share, for at least for the most part, a lot of them share common experiences from when they were growing up, that they were forced to live on the margins of society, that they were alienated from their fellow man, because it's like, oh no, you're different, therefore I'm gonna scroll faggot on the bathroom door or something, you know? They might not, they're not all the same kind of mutants. Some of them are very fucking different from one another, but they've all like had that kind of experience, and they all live in the world where the state has sort of labeled them an aberration to be exterminated. Which, whether we openly acknowledge it or not, is the fate of, you know, is kind of how the state treats queer people in the real world. And I feel like that's a large part of what X-Men evolved into drawing attention towards. I don't know what the comic was originally written to be, right? Maybe it was originally written to be that, in which case, again, more credit to the series and the writers and whatnot. But like, yeah. Something that people couldn't believe but would actually be realistic was the Blue Lady's insecurity about beauty standards. You mean Raven? Like, oh no, I'm blue, I'm ugly or something. Yeah, I think that's realistic. That you know, that insecurity would mount because there's pressure that a lot of the beauty standards necessarily involve a degree of social conformity and behavior that isn't just tied to like, I don't know, physically appealing features or whatever. Cyclops 97. Thank God I'm not like you're a Republican, or else you'd all be dead. Didn't say Republicans. Oh yeah. Like, thank God you're not a bunch of mutant haters or something, because I would have fucking slapped you around or something. Yeah. Yeah, thank goodness. Yeah, yeah. I think I kind of got that. Thank goodness we're not as hateful and miserable as you. Because being hateful makes you into a miserable piece of shit, you know? When so much of your... When you hate a political group of people, that requires effort, you know? And it sort of slowly consumes people's identities for their political identity, I guess, to revolve around hating a group of people. That kind of becomes everything that you are. And you just become a miserable wretch to be around, and like you basically what I'm saying is, if you're a Republican, you will never know happiness. Ow. Use item box. That's good. One mushroom. Not bad. Oh, I got a draft. That's nice. Let me try to break just a little bit so I can get this item. Oh, poor Matt. Ah, another draft. Oh, shit. Is it bad that I kind of want to be in first so I can get blued and then be in a bottom spot lap 5, but still be close enough that I can, like, get a really good item? Well. Let's just do this. Nice. Okay, now I don't want to be in first, but I do still want the blue shell to come so that it can hit that guy who is in first. Please hit somebody? Never mind. Oh, wait, this is perfect. Get in front of me? Yes. Don't hit me. Come on, passive people! You know what? I'll take that. Fuck. I hate that I still have this cough. It's just irritation. I'm not even sick anymore. What fucking gives, dude? Wah. I'm angry. Anyways. Oh, I actually wanted to... This is a mild... It's like a halfway departure from politics. I wanted to tell a nice story about my life. Because, recently, there have been some things that have given me additional drive to, read again. I finished, first I'll talk about this study that I read about AI, and then I'll talk about the meat of the matter, the main story. I read a study about the usage of AI and its impact on critical thinking abilities. This study was published this year, so it is current, and it is relevant. The publishing year is relevant for more reasons than just that. I read through it, and it was a both quantitative and qualitative study. They did a Likert scale questionnaire. The Likert scale is where you see oh, from 1 to 6, rate your feeling on this question. Strongly agree, strongly disagree, and then all the options in between. Or always, never, and then all the options in between. That's the Likert scale. I wonder what average people use AI for to lower their intelligence. Turns out, literally anything. As the study found, they did this. They did this study with a quantitative questionnaire, a qualitative questionnaire. They had a sample size, ironically enough, of exactly 666 people, which is really funny. If I were a religious person, I would say that that's a sign. But they proceeded with this questionnaire, they recorded these responses, and then they did some regression analysis. They did what I believe is called a random forest regression, which I have mixed feelings about, given that I've now read, I read a little bit about what it is and what it entails doing. And they did a multiple regression analysis, which is, that's something I'm not as skeptical of, right? So suffice it to say, the actual interviews and data looked like they were pretty good. And I'm setting all this context up because you better fucking believe that every single table where they measured this demonstrated that AI negatively impacts people's critical thinking skills via a process that people call cognitive offloading. Essentially, the only thing that you would ever use AI to do is offload the mental load that a cognitive task would otherwise take. Essentially, you tell the AI to do something that it would require critical thinking to do on your part so that you don't have to think critically. Surprise, surprise, this results in the deprecation and lack of use of the critical thinking centers of your brain, and it results in you being worse at critical thinking. They measured this across age groups, across education levels, across professions, and with both genders, both gender breakdown, and found that not only was AI a negative impact on critical thinking, literally regardless of any other demographic factors, but also AI represented, if I was reading the multiple regression table correctly, AI represented a larger negative impact on people's critical thinking skills than the combined positive impacts both of higher education and white-collar job experience. You know, white-collar job experience being something that you need a degree to do, desk jobs, stuff that you actually do have to use your critical thinking skills quite frequently to engage in. Writing reports, reading reports, parsing information, and statistics and data and that sort of stuff. All of the cumulative, like, benefits that experience in that field could bring you, as well as having a higher education, were eroded by AI usage. I'm not surprised if people could get away with it. They would sleepwalk through everything. Yes, and this is one of the reasons I think AI just straight up should be banned. Like, legit, full stop. Get that shit out of there. We already have a ban on certain, like, really unethical things. For example, cloning technology was something that, you know, people were speculating could provide some kind of value or whatever. There are some very limited use cases where lab-grown individual organs may be acceptable for certain purposes, but cloning an entire animal, cloning an entire human being is completely off the table for ethical reasons. You know? And I feel like AI should be given the same treatment. In fact, I think AI is an order of magnitude worse than cloning. In the case of cloning, right, creating an exact copy of an animal, be it something that we would consider livestock or a pet or even a human being, has numerous extremely weird implications, both parasocial and like genetic in some respect, and just like, well, mostly social and parasocial implications. And on, I think, that grounds alone, we've sort of banned the practice of cloning human beings, because it's different than just bringing a kid into the world, like by you know, you get married, you have a kid or whatever, because it's an exact copy, you know. But even in that case, you are actually bringing another living being into the world. You create an exact copy of you that is still a person with thoughts, emotions, feelings, and needs, and it's not like some fake bullshit designed to trick you. It's just extremely socially problematic and like parasocial, you know, in order to do that. But AI does not entail the actual contribution of new life into the world. In fact, if anything, it sort of takes that away by replacing... it replaces the joys of life, basically, is what AI is designed to do. It's designed to automate the reasons that we have to live, right? You think about the things that people enjoy doing, things that people do in their off time. They do art projects, they edit videos, like in my case, you know, you live stream, you talk with friends, you, I don't know, look up something fun online that you didn't know. AI is designed to take all of that away from you. And so I'd be okay with it just being banned. In fact, I think it should just be banned. But yeah, that's what this study found. And I didn't talk that much about the study itself because it didn't have that much to say, apart from, yeah, this is the study we set out to do. This was our research question. This was our sample size, our methods, and here were the results, and let's discuss the implications of those results. Implications were pretty straightforward. And also, I began to notice about 3 pages in to this study. You know, I'd read the abstract, and I think I had just finished up the introduction. The same sentence with slightly different wording was being repeated a little bit too frequently for me to, you know, overlook it. And as I went on, I realized, son of a bitch, they AI generated this paper. This paper about AI, written by some schmuck named Michael Gerlich at the Swiss Business School, was generated by AI. This paper that said, yeah, AI is like extremely detrimental to people's critical thinking abilities and like erodes your education and white collar job experience in whatever way that like you use it. He fucking used AI to write this. And I felt like such a sucker having read through that and realizing this guy AI generated a paper. You know? Because it's like, I really just read something that this guy didn't even bother to write. I felt cheated in a way. Now look, they did not use AI to do those interviews. They interviewed real people. They provided full transcripts and whatnot of those interviews. It's not like those fake polls where they just AI generated the respondents. They used some like machine learning for the regression, which was a part that I was a little bit skeptical of, but I'm not a professional like scientist or researcher, so I don't know the usefulness of that sort of thing as it pertains to like linear regression or whatever. And so I guess that ended up being why it felt like there wasn't that much to read, is because it was just the AI generating basically the same 3 sentences over and over again with some citations interspersed throughout. You know? And those 3 sentences, granted, was like, oh yeah, AI is used for cognitive offloading. This could have significant implications for people's critical thinking skills. It would seem that AI is very detrimental to people's critical thinking skills. It was like a few sentences like that composed about half of the entire text of the study. You know? In retrospect, I feel like I should have seen that coming. It was written by a single author. It was published this year in 2025, and it came from the fucking Swiss Business School. And I read this not but like a day and a half after having heard about an epidemic of like low quality research papers sort of flooding the journals that are all like AI generated and stuff. So in retrospect, I feel really dumb for having gone with a study like that. But I guess, look, studies I feel like from 2022 or 23 would kind of miss the mark for the fact that, like, there was still a shadow of doubt that maybe AI could potentially be used for something good someday, you know? But no, actually, we never get that, because that's not what AI does. That's not what it's designed to do. Hell, that's not what it's capable of doing. If it were capable to do any of that shit, they would have done it already. I can't believe I avoided those bananas. I want to probably throw this red shell or not. So that was the first thing, and which led to realization that I might like to disclose how I learned stuff. Because, you know, AI having such a corrosive effect on the critical thinking skills of the population at large, made me want to sort of, I don't know, share what I could. It reminded me of how I got through college, right? I feel like this is it might be a moment of like, you know, when I'm older, I talk about like some back in my day shit, but it actually matters because I'm probably smarter than most of the college grads that are in my field these days. Or maybe not. Maybe I'm too hard on the kids, but like basically don't use AI because it makes you stupider than you would be otherwise. In college, I didn't struggle that hard with academic stuff. I didn't struggle that much to do my classwork or my homework or to do the readings and stuff like that, except for the occasional circumstance where depression like would really have me out of it, or when I had like done an all-nighter or gotten a really bad night's sleep and would legitimately have trouble concentrating. But I did start to notice, even with like with how class was going. Class tended to go pretty well for me. There were 2 things that made me realize I think I need a better way to read and remember stuff, right? Number 1, I started really panicking when final exams came up. Sometimes in the midterms and finals, I was kind of like a deer in the headlights. I would be really fucking nervous. I don't think I ever got below a B on any of the exams I took, but even still, it was really intimidating. And a lot of that came down to, I feel like I would just forget a lot of the knowledge that I had accumulated, that I had learned throughout class. You know, because it's contingent, the final exam and midterm exam format is contingent on you being able to remember stuff. Now, as time went on, they were more and more generous about making these exams open note, which was great. I enjoyed, I liked that I could refer to the notes that I had taken to see what a certain issue was, or like what I could draw from to write an essay. And of course, credit to the professors for this. They made the exams things that you couldn't easily just sail through if you had access to your notes. You still had to know what you were doing. You had to know what you were talking about. You had to know exactly where to look, what section of the class that we were talking about, or like what, what phase of history, what is this relevant or germane to, right? Like you had to go fishing for that stuff, So this kind of and that on top of the other factor that led me to feel like I need a better method of retaining information, I just enjoyed learning. I really enjoyed, as much as it was like difficult to do these longer form projects and stuff like that, as much as I initially didn't enjoy that, I kind of got used to writing papers later on and grew to kind of enjoy the research process. I even just for the sake of it was like, I wish I could remember a lot of the stuff that I'm learning, because this is really cool shit. I love learning about history, learning about archaeology. The processes of production from yester-century, yester-millennia are super interesting to me. The way that trade routes develop, the sort of political landscape and the evolution of ideology throughout time. Who is the sort of in-group and out-group of the day? In what ways is that comparable to now? And like basically, did the Roman Empire have its version of socialism, basically, and socialist thinkers? Come to find out, yes, there were actually socialist theorists at the time of the Roman Empire, at the time of the Roman Republic even. You panicked, get notes, and you got better. Yes, but not exactly. The story I wanted to tell was something like this, right? I, in high school, developed a habit of writing down my notes, and it proved to be a good habit. But in college, I was like, I need to somehow make this better, because, like, reading is difficult, and, remembering shit for exams is difficult. I need a way to make that easier for myself. And it turns out the way to make that easier for myself was actually to make it harder, if that makes sense. I had and still have a gaming laptop, different gaming laptop than what I had in college, but it served all my needs from internet access, gaming, YouTube, watching movies and stuff like that. And there were some occasions when I used it for class and stuff. I used that laptop for homework, for classwork, for projects, etc. I relied on it quite heavily. But I came to find out that in the classes where I was allowed to have my laptop, taking notes on my laptop was not very effective. It was kind of like, compartmentalizing my notes on my laptop to a folder, like a subfolder in my documents folder. It was very easy for me to forget, and I never felt very comfortable doing that. And of course, it helped that in a fair few of my classes, I actually wasn't allowed to have my laptop in taking notes. So what did I do? Through all of my 4 years of college, I almost exclusively took notes with pen and paper. Not pencil and paper, pen and paper. Because I have different colored pens, I would color code my notes based on the day and the section that they were taking place. That, in combination with the physical process of writing, contributed to me being able to remember that stuff. Look at this writer's callus on my middle finger. That is a nasty ass writer's callus. That little bit of like physical pain and trauma, or even just physical effort that I have to put into writing stuff, helps with a method that I think I learned back in high school, where you have to sort of encounter information 3 times to really remember it, to really long-term be able to recall it. Number 1 was being exposed to the information as the professor says it in lecture. Number 2 is me writing down that information in my notebook. And this brings me to number 3. Every day after class, after I took those notes, what I would do, and this enabled me to have a surprising amount of free time. As other people were cramming for exams, I felt pretty confident for most of the exams from sophomore year onwards. As I, started employing this method, I would go back to my dorm, I'd open my notebook, and I would read out loud the notes I took in class that day. And that was information exposure number 3. With that, it made it like really, really consistent that I'd be able to remember stuff for a class. I would even be able to do well on on closed note midterm and final exams, because I heard the information in class when the professor mentioned it. I wrote it down physically with a pen on a sheet of paper in my notebook, and I would then verbally recall it later, so I could externalize the recall of that information. I could physically hear myself saying it. And when it came to exam time, all I would have to do is go to relevant sections. I would do a little bit of studying each day, and I would just go to the library, open up my notebook, and I'm sure I sounded crazy doing this, but it fucking worked. I opened my notebook and read out loud my notes to myself. I would just read them out loud, and then sometimes, if I needed to go through it once more, I would I would go back to the beginning of the section that I just read, and then sort of halfway whisper or mumble my way through that section. Again, just re-exposing myself to my notes. And that was it. That was all it took. That led to college academically basically being light work. And sure, I complained about it at the time because it took significantly longer for me to learn how to handle long-term, like, multi-week-long projects, and you know, how to do those that ended up being like a 15 to 20 page paper or a presentation, or both, you know, or something like that. Shit, I think towards the end of it, I was writing papers that had something like 20,000 words, you know, and not having that much trouble doing it. Ultimately, it was just because of that method of retaining information. It made it that much easier because I could just sort of passively remember shit off the top of my head. Didn't even really need to think about it that hard. I could just remember a bunch of different shit that I had learned, stuff that was interesting. I didn't have as much trouble picking topics for like research projects and whatever. And I would know what kind of question to ask to the research, like search engine for JSTOR to find an article on the subject that I could pull information from and cite in a paper. You know, because a lot of my papers were contingent on having citations, making academic arguments that were grounded in existing research. Yo, what's up, 1v3? That was my learning process throughout college. And you know what? I still do that. When I talk about reading stuff, sometimes I will take notes electronically nowadays, but I will go back and revisit my notes. You know, I'll read through something. I will take notes as I'm reading it, and then I just go back, I read my notes. I'll even just unprompted. Sometimes I'll go back through old notes that I took on stuff that I read. How do you think I remember so much shit from reading Adam Smith and Rosa Luxemburg? I wrote that shit down with my hand, and I read through it. And of course, in the latter years of college and a little while afterwards, I would also start taking notes on the margins. All of what I described was completely outside of all the books I was reading. This was before I ever started writing notes on the margins of the pages of the books that I read. And let me tell you, that like moderate inconvenience when I'm reading something makes it feel so much better to read, to learn, to whatever, than if I just went to an AI or looked up a Wikipedia summary of the thing I'm reading about. Hell, I wouldn't even have that much of an objection to looking at a Wikipedia summary because those can be quite long and in fact often serve as a good aggregator of existing research. You know, like if there's a lot of research, you know, you read Wikipedia, get you started, right? And that'll, you know, make you more knowledgeable than 90% of Americans, right? On that issue. But because I never really went to the convenience of just kind of taking notes on the computer and leaving it at that, and definitely never resorted to using like an AI assistant to summarize an article, I remember shit. I remember the shit that I read. That's why so often I'll be able to remember shit, but then not exactly remember where I remember it from. Because the information sticks with me. And for context, 1v3, I was just describing the technique that got me through college. This is what like allowed me basically to make light work of college in an academic sense. And it feels so good, you know, knowing that method. That number one, read the information. Number two, write the information down. Number three, go back and read your notes later. That's it. 1, 2, 3. Uno, dos, tres. You know, pick any subject and employ that method. And if you're interested in that subject, you will probably have expertise, relatively speaking, on it, like compared to 99% of the population in about 3 months' time. or even less. I'm a considerably slower reader now than I was in college, because in college there was deadlines to worry about. You know, you had to read stuff in time for the exam, you had to read stuff in time for a class and whatever, or in time to get a project done. But now I got all the time in the world. You know, there's no deadlines on my shoulders. Sure, I go to work every week and whatnot, but like, you know, I don't have to finish a 20-page research paper by the end of the end of the year or something. Nice skill. Yeah, and I actually wanted to share that because I feel like if anybody's having trouble if anybody has trouble in school, just remember that. And of course, it helps to be interested in the subject. And I think I might be comfortable just to cap the stream off there. Like high school, my memory got me by. For sure, that's a great tip. Yeah. Yeah, you know, in high school, in all throughout, like, from elementary, middle, and high school, I never studied for anything. I never needed to. You know? I had such a good memory and was so interested in the information that I was being given, I could actually just breeze my way through. I think it wasn't even until middle school that I even started taking notes on stuff. You know? And that was just because I had to. They legitimately, they told me, start taking notes. That's your participation grade. And so I was doing that to participate in class. And then in high school, I was taking notes, but I wasn't studying. Still made straight A's and B's. And then in college, I realized I'm not going to be able to rely on my memory anymore. Not solely. So I'm going to have to help myself out. I'm going to have to try to find some other way to learn stuff. And while a lot of other people around me did very quickly get bogged down in the tools of convenience, right? Just typing, like writing notes on their laptop and then just kind of forgetting about it, at which point they would really struggle with major projects and like exams and stuff, and they'd have to start cramming. I took the time to write everything physically. Again, that's why I've got this nasty writer's callus. Couldn't read or spell most words, so I couldn't take notes because they would be useless, and I can't do it in high school and middle school, so they told me can't do it in high school and middle school when they told me, so I just left it empty. Then rely on the vocab that you do know. If there's a word that you don't know how to spell, just spell it phonetically. There's absolutely no shame in taking notes that are spelled wrong. You think I spelled everything right? I had a pretty big vocab in high school and college. I was not afraid to spell out a word that I didn't know how to spell. You know? Because you could just look that shit up later. Just write things incorrectly now, as long as you get the idea. And then if you want to go and clarify, like, how is this word actually spelled? You can look it up later. That's where the tools of convenience are actually helpful. You know, like a Google search. Except Google search actually sucks now, so you gotta, like, specifically look for, like, I don't know, Merriam-Webster dictionary or something. And of course, a lot of this also comes down to, if you find something that you are interested in, that you want to learn about, then you will be capable of incredible things. You know? Like, I would not have gone through the trouble of writing so much that it gave me this nasty-ass callus on my middle finger. I would not still be writing so much that that callus remains on my middle finger if it wasn't shit that I really enjoyed learning about. You know? I guess in that way, I am Rosa Luxemburg's strongest warrior, and I'm proud of myself for that. Just a skill issue and using the right notebook for the right subject. Yeah, you know, that all it takes is a little bit of skill with categorization. I think I had separate notebooks, or at least separate sections in each notebook. They would have like those cardboard dividers and stuff for each class. Gotron, I'm not sure I take your meaning. Might be another autocorrect moment. Or autocomplete or something. Anyway. The bump on your finger? Oh. Talk about it so much. They cut the little piece off. I used to have a nasty habit of chewing it because it was like, you know, because it was like I was nervous a lot. But no, this is natural. If you ask your parents, do you have a writer's callus? They probably will. My dad has one. My mom has one. A lot of people, everybody who grew up or spent a large portion of their life not being able to use like a keyboard for stuff will probably have a nasty ass callus on their middle finger of whichever hand is their dominant hand. How hard do you hold the pencil? It's not a matter of how hard you hold it. It's just a matter of holding it at all. You see, see how I hold this pen? Most people actually some people actually hold it like this, which is psychotic. But I hold a writing implement like this. And of course, there's a certain degree of steadiness that you have to have when you're writing, but I'm not holding it that hard. The thing that makes a writer's callus happen is just repeated use. You write once, you're not going to get a writer's callus just from writing one time, right? You could even write 2 or 3 times. You could even apply a lot of pressure and grip it like your life depends on it and write one time, you won't get a writer's callus. Writer's callus happens from repeated use of your hand in that position to write. You know? In elementary school, I wrote with this hand like this. In middle school, I wrote with this hand like this. In high school, I wrote with this hand like this. In college, same thing. And I did it a lot. I did it more as time went on. Talk about the skin that hardens. Can't you saw that away like your feet? You could, but I feel like it'd be kind of dangerous, right? Calluses aren't bad. It's a natural reaction and adaptation that your skin undergoes from repeated activity, right? You having a callus there makes it less likely that you'll be injured or incur like a blister or some other kind of welt or, you know, a boo-boo. Using actual hard blade, soft blade. Yeah, I know. What I'm saying is you don't always want to shave off a callus, you know? Like if you walk around a lot, the bottom of your foot is going to be very calloused. And that's actually advantageous because it'll mean that you don't get, like, your feet don't get hurt as easily from you walking around. I hold my pen on my thumb and in between the bottom of my middle and index finger. So like this, right? Kind of like I'm holding it. I feel like this is a pretty common grip. Like if I wanted to write something, oh, wait. On my thumb, the bottom. Oh, like this, kind of like at the base of your finger. Oh wow. Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what? I've never I feel like I've only rarely seen people write like this. It's not as bad as people who write like this. I've seen people who write with just the thumb and the index and don't use their middle finger to steady it. And I'm like, how do you fucking do that? I can technically write like this, but it's so messy and chicken scratchy that my middle finger just kind of by default rises up to steady the pen and be like, all right, let me get that for you, Chief. Anyways. Had extra classes in primary school, how to hold my pen, write, cut, draw, and now everyone always says I do all that stuff weird. Well, I mean, it might certainly be not the way that the majority of people do it, but if it's a technique that helps you do it consistently and steadily and whatnot, then by all means, right? I feel like if anything, though, that would just mean that your writer's callus is closer to the base of your finger. Anywho, this has been a stream that started about the BBB in parentheses Big Beautiful Bill and went all sorts of places, and I talked about education, and I love talking about education, so I'm gonna raid Cody Schwab because he's live. Another BBB? No way. Yeah, look, we got the farmer villager party, we got the big beautiful bill, and we got big booty bitches, which is way cooler than both of them. So, you know, hopefully we'll get that. And you know, you should see the segment about short recap conclusion for the Dutch BBB hater. The Dutch BBB is cringe. The American BBB is like actually America is actually over because it cuts every like essential service and also makes it impossible for any court to enforce a ruling against the government, and no media outlets are talking about it. And this is quickening the collapse of America. Hopefully, we will eventually enter the big booty bitches chapter of history. That's the recap. But until then, it's like pretty Jover for America. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Ah, hell yeah, that's the spirit.